homeless man sitting on a cold Seattle street asked Snoop Dogg for just $1. What happened next left everyone stunned and changed the man's life forever. Before we dive into this incredible story, comment below where you're watching from today. If this story of kindness inspires you, don't forget to subscribe for more. In the heart of Seattle, where the city's rhythm pulsed relentlessly, life on the streets told a story far different from the world that moved above it. Cars honked impatiently, pedestrians weaved through sidewalks, and the hum of urban life filled every corner. Among the chaos, there was Marcus. He sat on the cold pavement at the intersection of Jefferson Avenue and Martin Street, a worn cardboard sign propped beside him. It read simply, "Anything helps. God bless." The harsh winter wind pierced through his layers of second-hand clothes, making him shiver as he adjusted the beanie on his head. At 42 years old, Marcus had been living on the streets for almost a year. The life he once knew, a job at a factory, a small apartment, even the mundane comfort of routine, had slipped away after a series of misfortunes. Losing his job had been the first blow, but it was his failing health that sealed his fate. Rent became unpayable, and before he knew it, the streets became his only home. Each day felt like a roll of the dice. Some days, strangers dropped coins into the small tin can he kept beside him. On others, they avoided his gaze entirely, hurrying past him as though he were invisible. Marcus had grown used to the indifference, but it didn't make the loneliness any easier. He watched the world pass by, high heels, sneakers, polished loafers, each step a reminder of a life he could no longer touch. Then, one day, something different caught his eye. A pair of pristine white sneakers stopped a few feet from where he sat. These weren't ordinary shoes. They gleamed with a sort of untouchable luxury, the kind only someone truly young and influential might wear. Intrigued, Marcus looked up, squinting against the pale winter sunlight. The man wearing them stood tall, his posture composed, with his hands casually tucked into the pockets of a stylish jacket. There was an air of calm confidence about him, the kind that made people whisper and stare. Around them, passers-by began to notice the man, pulling out their phones to snap discreet pictures. At first, Marcus didn't recognize him. His mind, dulled by months of survival, struggled to place the familiar face. But the man's presence felt significant in a way Marcus couldn't explain. Marcus hesitated. He wasn't the type to speak to someone unless they made the first move. But there was something different about this man, something that urged Marcus to take a chance. Taking a deep breath, he called out, his voice raspy from the cold air. "Hey man," he began hesitantly. "Can you spare $1?" The man stopped mid-scroll on his phone. For a moment he didn't move, as though the question had frozen him in place. Slowly, he turned to face Marcus, his expression unreadable. Marcus braced himself for rejection, already accustomed to being dismissed. But instead of walking away or offering a quick excuse, the man stayed. He looked at Marcus carefully, almost as if he were trying to understand the man sitting on the pavement before him. What Marcus didn't yet realize was that this moment, this simple question would set off a chain of events that would change his life forever. Marcus's voice wavered as he spoke, his words barely audible over the hum of the city. "Hey man," he said again, summoning a courage he didn't know he had. "Can you spare $1?" The man with the pristine white sneakers paused mid-scroll on his phone. Slowly, he tilted his head, as though processing the simple request. For a fleeting moment, Marcus wondered if he'd made a mistake. Most people avoided him, pretending they hadn't heard, or worse, offering quick excuses before rushing off. But this man didn't rush away. He looked up, his expression unreadable, and turned to fully face Marcus. The afternoon sunlight illuminated his face, and recognition finally struck. Marcus blinked, his breath catching. The man before him wasn't just anyone, it was Snoop Dogg. The rapper's towering presence was unmistakable, yet there was no entourage, no flashy display of wealth. He stood alone, his calm demeanor radiating an unexpected humility. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Marcus, sitting slumped on the pavement, felt an uncomfortable awareness of how disheveled he must appear. His ragged clothes, the dirt under his fingernails, the hollow eyes of someone who hadn't slept properly in weeks. Finally, Snoop broke the silence, his voice calm but firm. "What do you need it for?" The question took Marcus off guard. It wasn't dismissive or condescending. It was genuine, as though Snoop truly wanted to understand. Marcus rubbed his hands together, feeling the sting of cold against his fingertips. Well, he began hesitantly. A cup of coffee would be nice. Maybe a sandwich if I'm lucky. His voice faltered, betraying the vulnerability he tried so hard to hide. Snoop nodded slightly, his gaze steady. There was no judgment in his eyes, just curiosity mixed with quiet empathy. Marcus noticed the growing attention around them. Passers-by were slowing down, some discreetly pulling out their phones to record the unusual sight of a celebrity standing still, speaking to a homeless man. Marcus shifted uneasily under the weight of the stairs, wishing the ground could swallow him whole. He wasn't used to this kind of attention. It made him feel exposed, like a spectacle. But Snoop didn't seem to notice, or if he did, he didn't care. "What's your name?" Snoop asked, crouching down slightly so he was closer to Marcus's level. Marcus hesitated, unsure if he should answer, but there was something in Snoop's tone, an undeniable sincerity that made him trust the question. "It's Marcus," he said quietly. Snoop nodded again, his lips curling into a faint smile. "Marcus," he repeated, as though committing it to memory. "I'm Snoop." The introduction felt oddly ordinary, devoid of the bravado Marcus expected from a world-famous rapper. Snoop's calmness was disarming, making Marcus feel for the first time in a long while like he was being seen, not as a problem to be ignored, but as a person with a name and a story. The moment stretched, the noise of the city fading into the background. Marcus could feel the tension in the air, the curiosity of the crowd that had now gathered around them. He wanted to shrink away, to disappear back into the anonymity of the streets. But Snoop's presence anchored him there as if silently urging him not to retreat. And then, just as Marcus began to wonder what Snoop would do next, the rapper reached into his pocket. Marcus's heart quickened, a flicker of hope sparking within him. He had asked for $1, just one, but the gesture hinted at something far more significant. The moment hung in suspense, the world seeming to hold its breath. Marcus couldn't have known it then, but what happened next would become a defining chapter in his life. The air between them felt charged as Snoop Dogg reached into his pocket. Marcus's pulse quickened, his mind racing with a mix of hope and skepticism. He had asked for $1, just a single small act of kindness to buy a moment's relief from the relentless grind of the streets. But Snoop's movements suggested something far greater. When Snoop's hand emerged, it wasn't holding a crumpled dollar bill. Instead, he extended a crisp $100 note, the edges pristine as if it had never been touched. Marcus stared at it, blinking in disbelief, the sight almost too surreal to process. "This should cover more than coffee," Snoop said, his voice steady, almost casual. Marcus's throat tightened, his fingers trembling as he hesitated to take the money. "Are you serious?" he managed to whisper, his voice cracking. "Why would you do that?" Snoop's expression softened and he shrugged lightly. "Because I can," he replied simply. The answer struck Marcus with a force he hadn't expected. It wasn't just the generosity of the gesture, it was the simplicity behind it. There was no fanfare, no expectation of gratitude or repayment. For a man like Marcus, who had spent nearly a year being ignored or dismissed, the sheer weight of being noticed, of being helped, felt overwhelming. But Snoop wasn't finished. He leaned in slightly, lowering his voice, his tone growing more serious. "But listen," he said, his gaze locking with Marcus's. "This isn't just about the money. I want you to promise me something." Marcus clutched the bill, holding it like it might vanish at any moment. "What's that?" he asked cautiously, his voice barely above a whisper. "If I help you today," Snoop said, his voice calm but firm, "you've got to help yourself tomorrow. Deal?" The words hung in the air, heavy with meaning. Marcus felt a lump rise in his throat, the weight of the promise sinking into him. No one had ever asked him for anything like this before. People who occasionally tossed him coins never demanded accountability, never asked for him to try. They didn't care what happened next. But here was a man, someone who had every reason to walk away, asking Marcus not just to take the money, but to take a chance on himself. For a moment, Marcus felt an odd mix of pressure and gratitude. The streets had hardened him and taught him to question the motives behind any act of kindness. Yet Snoop's demeanor and his words carried a sincerity that was impossible to ignore. Finally, Marcus nodded, his voice trembling as he said, "Okay, deal." Snoop straightened up, his lips curling into a faint smile. "Good," he said simply. But instead of walking away, Snoop reached into his pocket once more, pulling out a pen and a small notepad. He scribbled something quickly, then tore off the sheet and handed it to Marcus. "Go to this address tomorrow morning," Snoop instructed, his voice steady. "They'll help you out. Tell them I sent you." Marcus unfolded the piece of paper, his hands trembling as he read the address. It was for a community support hub, a place he'd heard of but had never visited, too weighed down by pride and shame. "I'll make sure they're expecting you," Snoop added. His calm tone carried a quiet authority, as if he had no doubt Marcus would follow through. Marcus stared at the paper, then back at Snoop. Words failed him. He wanted to say thank you, to express the flood of emotion surging through him, but nothing felt adequate. Instead, he simply nodded, clutching the note and the money as though they were lifelines. As Snoop stood and adjusted his jacket, Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that this moment was far bigger than either of them realized. The crowd around them was still growing, their whispers and camera flashes creating a surreal backdrop. But for Marcus, the world seemed to shrink, leaving just him and Snoop and a flicker of hope he hadn't felt in years. The following morning, Marcus found himself standing outside a modest brick building on a quieter side of Seattle. The small sign above the entrance read, "Community Support Hub." The words felt both intimidating and inviting. He clutched the torn note Snoop had given him in one hand, the edges worn from where his fingers had traced it repeatedly during the long, restless night. The $100 bill was still safely tucked into his jacket pocket, a physical reminder of the generosity he had received. Yet, as Marcus stood there, a wave of doubt crept in. What if this was all too good to be true? What if he walked in and was turned away, just another face in a system that couldn't care less? He took a deep breath, the cold morning air biting at his lungs. The promise he'd made to Snoop echoed in his mind. "If I help you today, you've got to help yourself tomorrow." It was this promise that propelled him forward, pushing open the door and stepping inside. The warmth of the building enveloped him immediately, a stark contrast to the chill outside. The space was modest but welcoming, with a few chairs arranged neatly in the waiting area and a reception desk manned by a middle-aged woman with kind eyes and a soft smile. "Good morning," she said warmly, looking up from her computer. "How can I help you today?" Marcus hesitated, his hands fidgeting as he unfolded the note and slid it across the counter. "Snoop sent me," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. The woman's eyes flicked to the paper, her expression brightening with recognition. "Ah, you must be Marcus," she said, standing up with a smile. "We've been expecting you." Marcus blinked in surprise. They were expecting him? The thought made his chest tighten, a mix of relief and disbelief washing over him. "Come on," the woman said, motioning for him to follow. "Let's get you started." What followed was a whirlwind of support and care, unlike anything Marcus had experienced in years. First, he met with a caseworker, a patient and understanding man named Peter, who listened to Marcus's story without judgment. For the first time, Marcus felt like someone truly cared about what had happened to him, not just the surface details, but the pain and struggles beneath them. Peter laid out a plan to help Marcus get back on his feet. The first step was addressing his immediate needs. Marcus was given a temporary bed in the shelter upstairs, a small but clean and comfortable space where he could finally rest without fear of being harassed or freezing in the night. Next came the medical checkup. A volunteer doctor examined Marcus, prescribing treatments for his lingering health issues. Nothing serious, but enough to explain the fatigue and aches that had weighed him down for months. Marcus was even scheduled for a follow-up appointment to ensure he was on the path to recovery. The final piece of the plan filled Marcus with equal parts hope and apprehension. Job training. The center offered programs to teach skills and connect participants with potential employers. Marcus was enrolled in a workshop set to begin the following week. The idea of working again felt daunting, but it also sparked something inside him, a flicker of the man he used to be before everything had fallen apart. As the day went on, Marcus couldn't help but feel overwhelmed. It was as though the pieces of his shattered life were being carefully picked up and arranged, one by one. The staff treated him with a kindness he hadn't known in years, their encouragement steady and genuine. That evening, as Marcus sat on the edge of his cot, he let himself exhale for what felt like the first time in forever. The day had been exhausting but transformative. The promise he'd made to Snoop still lingered in his mind, and for the first time, Marcus believed he could keep it. Unbeknownst to Marcus, the moment he shared with Snoop Dogg on that busy Seattle street had not gone unnoticed. Among the crowd of curious onlookers that day, one person had discreetly recorded the entire interaction on their phone. From the moment Marcus hesitantly asked for $1 to Snoop's quiet act of crouching down and offering both his time and a $100 bill, the scene had been captured in full. That night, the video found its way onto social media. It began as a single post, accompanied by a simple caption, "Snoop Dogg and a homeless man, proof that kindness still exists." Within hours, it had gained traction, shared by hundreds, then thousands, and soon millions of users. The clip resonated with people in ways the original recorder could never have imagined. It wasn't just about a celebrity handing out money, it was about the humanity of the moment, the way Snoop had taken the time to ask Marcus's name, listen to his story, and give him not just cash but a sense of purpose. Comments poured in from every corner of the internet. Some praised Snoop for using his platform to do something meaningful, while others reflected on the rarity of such acts in today's world. Privileged with a purpose, one user wrote, summing up the sentiment shared by many. "This is how you use it for good." Another said, "It's sad that kindness like this shocks us, but I'm glad Snoop is showing what's possible." Of course, not everyone was convinced. Skeptics questioned whether the act was genuine or merely a publicity stunt. "Is this just for the cameras?" One comment read. "If he wanted to help, why do it where people could see?" But for every skeptical voice, there were dozens more defending Snoop's intentions. People pointed out how he had stayed silent in the aftermath, avoiding interviews or statements that might turn the act into a spectacle. While debates swirled online, the video's impact began to spread far beyond social media. Inspired by Snoop's actions, countless individuals decided to take matters into their own hands. Stories began emerging of strangers performing small acts of kindness, buying meals for the homeless, donating coats to shelters, and simply taking the time to acknowledge the people society so often overlooked. The video even sparked a viral hashtag, #YourKindnessChallenge, encouraging people to share their own efforts to make the world a little brighter. Meanwhile, local charitable organizations felt the ripple effects firsthand. The Community Support Hub, the very center Snoop had directed Marcus to, saw a sudden influx of donations and volunteers. People who had watched the video reached out to offer financial contributions, food, clothing, and even their time to help those in need. One of the shelter's directors, overwhelmed by the outpouring of support, told a local news outlet, "It's incredible how one simple act can inspire so many. We've been able to expand our programs and help more people than ever before, all because someone chose to care." Back at the shelter, Marcus remained largely unaware of the growing buzz surrounding his story. He was too focused on taking the steps laid out before him, attending his first counseling session, filling out job applications, and learning to believe in himself again. It wasn't until a staff member showed him the viral video that Marcus fully grasped the scope of what had happened. Sitting in the shelter's common room, he watched the footage on a borrowed phone. The sight of himself on screen, the hollow eyes, the defeated posture, made his stomach churn. He barely recognized the man in the video. Yet, as he watched Snoop crouch down and speak to him with such sincerity, Marcus felt a surge of gratitude. It wasn't just the money or the address that had changed his life, it was the reminder that he mattered, that someone believed in him enough to offer a hand when he needed it most. As the video ended, Marcus handed the phone back, a mixture of embarrassment and awe washing over him. He still had a long road ahead, but for the first time in years, he didn't feel entirely alone. In the weeks following his first visit to the Community Support Center, Marcus began to see changes. Subtle at first, but unmistakably real. The weight that had hung heavy on his shoulders for so long started to lift as he took small yet meaningful steps forward. The staff at the center had not only provided him with temporary shelter and medical care, but had also given him a sense of structure he hadn't felt in years. Every morning Marcus woke up in a warm bed, a stark contrast to the cold pavement he had grown accustomed to. He attended job training workshops, learning skills that gave him confidence he thought he'd lost forever. One day, as he prepared for his first job interview in years, Marcus stood in front of a small mirror in the center's common room. Dressed in donated but neatly pressed clothes, he hardly recognized himself. The nervousness he felt was tempered by something he hadn't experienced in a long time. He practiced his answers to potential questions, his voice steadying with each repetition. The man staring back at him in the mirror wasn't the same one who had sat on the cold pavement weeks ago, asking a stranger for $1. This man had a spark in his eyes, a glimmer of determination that was slowly but surely returning. When the day of the interview arrived, Marcus walked into the small office with his head held high. Though his palms were sweaty and his heart raced, he pushed through the nerves, drawing strength from the promise he'd made to himself and to Snoop. The interviewer, a middle-aged man with kind eyes, listened intently as Marcus spoke about his willingness to learn and work hard. It wasn't perfect. Marcus stumbled over a few answers, but when he left the office, he felt an unfamiliar sense of pride. He had shown up, faced his fears, and tried. That, in itself, was a victory. Bookmark. As Marcus continued to rebuild his life, he found strength not only in the resources and support around him, but also in the encouragement of those who had heard his story. The staff at the shelter often reminded him of how far he had come, and the other residents began to look to him as a source of inspiration. One evening, while Marcus was sitting in the common room, lost in thought, he heard a hesitant voice call his name. "Marcus?" He turned, his eyes narrowing as he tried to place the face before him. It was a woman, her features vaguely familiar, though softened by time. Then it hit him. "Lisa?" he said, his voice trembling. It was his younger sister, the one he hadn't spoken to in over a decade. Lisa nodded, tears welling in her eyes as she stepped closer. "I saw the video," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "I knew it was you, and I realized I had to find you. I've been looking for you ever since. I've lost you for too long." Marcus felt his chest tighten, a mixture of joy and guilt washing over him. "I didn't make it easy," he admitted, his voice cracking. "I shut everyone out when things got bad." Lisa reached out, placing a hand on his shoulder. "It doesn't matter now. What matters is that we're here, and I'm not going anywhere." The two sat together for hours, sharing stories of the years they'd lost. They spoke of the pain they had both carried, the misunderstandings that had kept them apart, and the hope of starting fresh. For Marcus, the reunion was both bittersweet and healing, a reminder of what he had lost, but also what he still had to fight for. As the days turned into weeks, Lisa became a regular presence in Marcus's life. She attended his counseling sessions, offered encouragement as he continued his job search, and most importantly, reminded him that he wasn't alone. Together, they began to mend the fractured pieces of their relationship, finding solace in the shared belief that it was never too late to start again. As the weeks turned into months, Marcus's life began to take on a shape he hadn't thought possible in a long time. The steps he had taken, no matter how small, had brought him to a place of stability and hope. He had secured a part-time job through the training program, one that allowed him to earn an honest living while continuing to focus on rebuilding himself. Each day felt like a new chapter, with Marcus slowly piecing together the fragments of his old life. Yet, it wasn't just the external changes, the steady paycheck, the roof over his head, or the improved health that defined his transformation. It was the internal shift, the realization that he was worthy of care, that his life held value, even when he had once believed otherwise. One evening, as Marcus sat in a small but cozy apartment provided through a transitional housing program, he found himself reflecting on how far he had come. On the table, before he lay the torn piece of paper with the address Snoop had given him. Beside it, a framed photograph of him and Lisa, taken during one of their recent family dinners, smiled back at him. The memories of that cold afternoon on the Seattle street came rushing back. Marcus thought about the moment he had looked up to see Snoop Dogg standing there, offering not just money but something far greater. A chance. It wasn't the $100 that had changed his life. It was the look in Snoop's eyes, the simple act of being seen, of being spoken to as an equal. Snoop didn't just give me money, Marcus whispered to himself. He gave me back my sense of worth. As Marcus reflected, his story continued to ripple across the internet and beyond. The viral video of his encounter with Snoop had become a touchstone for conversations about kindness, privilege, and the power of small actions. News outlets continued to highlight the story, though Snoop himself remained characteristically silent, letting the actions speak louder than any words. The video's message resonated deeply with people from all walks of life. It wasn't just about the money. It was about the reminder that even the smallest gestures could have an immeasurable impact. The hashtag #YourKindnessChallenge continued to trend, with countless stories of generosity being shared across social media. Inspired by the movement, Marcus began to give back in his own way. He volunteered at the very shelter that had helped him, sharing his story with others who were in the position he had once been in. To those who felt trapped by their circumstances, Marcus's journey became a beacon of hope, a living testament that change was possible, no matter how dark things seemed. In time, Marcus was invited to speak at community events where he recounted his experience with Snoop Dogg and the life-altering promise he had made that day. His words were simple but powerful. Kindness doesn't have to be big to make a difference. Sometimes all it takes is someone willing to see you, to remind you that you matter. Snoop did that for me, and if I can, I want to do that for someone else. The story concluded with a message that lingered long after the video ended. Kindness doesn't need to be grand. One small act can change an entire life. The final image showed Marcus walking confidently into the future, a man transformed by hope and determination. His steps were no longer hesitant, no longer weighed down by the burden of survival. Instead, they were purposeful, driven by a quiet resolve to pay forward the kindness he had received. The credits rolled, leaving viewers with a powerful takeaway. In a world often defined by indifference, one moment of compassion could ripple outwards, creating waves of change in ways no one could predict. This marks the final part of Marcus's story, a tale of redemption, resilience, and the enduring power of kindness. If this story touched your heart, we'd love to hear from you. Did it inspire you? Share your thoughts in the comments below, whether they resonated deeply or didn't quite connect. Your feedback matters and helps us bring you the stories that mean the most. Don't forget to subscribe so you never miss the meaningful moments we have in store. And if you have your own story to share, we'd love to hear it. Let's keep